The metal cup emptied over the new black officer's head, and the entire precinct laughed like racism was part of the uniform. Lieutenant Holloway called it a welcome lesson, then assigned him a broken radio, a deadly solo patrol, and a career-ending setup when humiliation wasn't enough. They edited the footage, planted drugs in his locker, and prepared to parade him out in handcuffs. How brave 6 armed cops bullying one calm man because they thought he had no power. But they missed one tiny detail. The officer they were trying to destroy was their newly appointed captain. Tell us where you're watching from, and stay until the end, because their downfall will not disappoint. The laughter started before Elias Monroe reached the center of the cafeteria. It was Tuesday afternoon at Precinct 17, 3 days before the department would announce its new captain, and nearly everyone believed Acting Lieutenant Grant Holloway was about to receive the promotion. Elias entered in an ordinary patrol uniform wearing no visible rank beyond his badge. His file showed only his name, service number, and transfer from another district. Chief Regina Caldwell had ordered that his true position remain secret until Friday. Holloway examined him slowly, then asked Human Resources, filling a diversity quota. Now several officers laughed. Sergeant Wade Carver pointed to a table beside the trash cans. New people sit there until they understand the rules. Elias looked at it, then calmly chose an empty table in the middle of the room. He began eating. That quiet refusal irritated Holloway more than any insult could have. He sat opposite Elias and asked whether he had been disciplined, whether his former precinct had grown tired of him, and whether a black officer his age had been transferred because no one else wanted him. Elias answered briefly and kept eating. Holloway's smile hardened. He picked up a metal cup filled with ice water, stood, and poured it over Elias's head. Water ran down Elias's face, soaked his collar, and splashed across his food. Carver and Eric Nolan laughed while Tyler Boone raised his phone to record. A few officers looked away. Holloway held the empty cup above Elias and said, "Around here, new people learn to bow before they're allowed to stand." Elias wiped the water from his eyes, placed his spoon beside the tray, and looked directly at him. "Do you treat every new officer this way?" he asked. "Or only the ones who don't look like you?" Silence fell. Holloway leaned close. "Your next question could cost you your job before you finish your first week." Officer Sofia Ramirez brought Elias a towel, but Carver snatched it from her and warned her not to ruin the welcome lesson. Elias did not stand or strike anyone. Instead, he studied the room, the camera above the vending machines, the blind spot near the kitchen, the officers who laughed, the ones who lowered their eyes, and the few who looked afraid. Beneath the table, his phone vibrated. A secure message from Caldwell appeared. "Do not intervene before Friday. We need to know how far they will go when they believe you have no power." If they could treat a fellow officer this way before witnesses, civilians, and lower-ranking employees had probably suffered far worse behind closed doors. Holloway assigned Elias to patrol South Brookdale alone, although policy required every newly transferred officer to ride with an experienced partner. Sophia inspected the vehicle and discovered its radio had been reported defective 2 days earlier. She quietly told Elias to request another car, but Carver appeared and ordered him to use the assigned one. "Unless you're already too scared to work," he added. Elias climbed behind the wheel. As the engine started, Holloway approached the open window. "Tonight," he said softly, "you'll learn the difference between wearing the uniform and actually belonging here." Elias drove through the gate as the radio crackled. The moment his patrol car disappeared, Carver entered the dispatch room and ordered the operator to sign in with an administrator account. Elias was heading into the city's most dangerous district with a radio that could barely carry his voice. But the greatest danger was not waiting in the streets. It was inside the precinct, deciding whether his call for help would ever be answered. The call reached Elias Monroe just before midnight. A frightened woman whispered that her husband was drunk, armed, and threatening to kill her if she tried to leave with their son. By the time Elias reached the small house in South Brookdale, the street was dark, the porch light was broken, and a child's crying could be heard through the walls. Elias lifted his radio and requested immediate backup, but the speaker answered with nothing except static. He tried again, slower and louder. Still, nothing. Pulling a secondary device from the patrol car, he contacted dispatch directly. Keisha Lane received the transmission and immediately marked the call as a highest priority armed domestic emergency. Then, before her eyes, the classification changed. An administrator account downgraded it to a non-emergency family dispute. Keisha corrected it. Seconds later, it was downgraded again. She stared at the screen, realizing someone inside the department was actively preventing other officers from responding. Outside the house, Elias could not afford to wait. He positioned himself behind the engine block of his patrol car and called through a partially open window. The suspect shouted incoherently, accusing his wife Grace Bennett of trying to take everything from him. Elias did not storm the door or make empty threats. He kept the man talking while quietly directing Grace to move her son toward the back entrance. For several minutes, the plan worked. Then the suspect noticed the movement dragged the boy back into the room and raised his gun toward Elias. Elias had a clear shot, but he saw the man's hands trembling and noticed that his finger was not fully on the trigger. Instead of firing, he lowered his own weapon slightly. "Daniel," he called, using the name Grace had given dispatch. "Your son is watching you. Whatever happens next will be the last thing he remembers about his father." The man hesitated. Elias continued speaking calm and steady until Daniel released the child. Grace pulled her son outside. A few minutes later, Daniel placed the gun on the floor and walked out with his hands raised. Only after the danger had passed did 3 patrol cars arrive. Carver Tyler Boone and Eric Nolan stepped out as though they had rushed to a crisis instead of waiting for it to end. Nolan slammed Daniel to the pavement even though he was already surrendering. Tyler immediately began recording carefully, framing Elias with his weapon still in hand while Grace held her crying son behind him. Carver looked around the scene and accused Elias of taking too long. "You gave an armed man time to threaten a child," he said. Elias lowered his weapon and asked, "Why was my request for backup ignored?" Carver's face remained cold. "Maybe dispatch did not think you were worth risking more officers." Back at the communications center, Keisha opened the access history. The emergency had been downgraded using Holloway's administrator credentials, but the login came from a computer in the officer's lounge, where the security camera had mysteriously gone offline. Before the record could be altered, Keisha photographed the screen and saved the image to a private device. When Elias returned to Precinct 17, Holloway was waiting in the briefing room. Instead of asking whether Grace and her son were safe, he demanded to know why Elias had not fired. "An officer too weak to act can get his partners killed," Holloway said. Elias looked around the room. No partner came when I called. The silence that followed was immediate and uncomfortable. Holloway quickly changed tactics, accusing Elias of violating tactical procedure and ordering him to submit a full written report before sunrise. Sofia Ramirez later approached Elias near the lockers and showed him the department policy requiring newly transferred officers to patrol with an experienced partner. His assignment had not merely been reckless, it had been illegal. Before dawn, Tyler uploaded an 18-second video with the title, "New Officer Points Gun at White Mother and Child." The footage showed Grace crying, her son terrified, and Elias holding a weapon. It did not show the armed suspect, the negotiation, the rescue, or the deliberate failure to send backup. Within an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. Elias had saved a family without firing a single shot. By morning, the officers at Precinct 17 had transformed him into the threat they claimed the city needed protection from. By sunrise, Tyler Boone's 18-second video had spread across Brookdale like a verdict delivered before a trial. Local accounts called Elias Monroe a threat in uniform, while anonymous users posted his service history, home address, and photographs of the apartment building where he lived. Some demanded his dismissal. Others suggested that someone should teach him what fear feels like. None of them had seen the armed suspect, the terrified child pulled back into the house, or the moment Elias lowered his weapon to prevent a father from dying in front of his son. At Precinct 17, Grant Holloway called an emergency review before Elias had even finished his report. Elias was not allowed to select his own legal representative. Instead, Union Attorney Martin Sloan entered the conference room, placed a folder on the table, and said, "I'm here to protect the interests of the unit. Do not confuse that with protecting you." Holloway played Tyler's edited video on a large screen, freezing the image where Elias stood armed, while Grace Bennett held her crying child. Then he produced a written complaint, supposedly signed by Grace, accusing Elias of terrifying her son and escalating the situation unnecessarily. Elias asked to speak with her directly. Holloway refused, claiming the department was protecting her from pressure by the accused officer. What Elias did not know was that Eric Nolan had taken Grace's phone as evidence, leaving her unable to contact anyone at the precinct. She had never written the complaint and did not even know one existed under her name. Elias requested the full recording from his body camera. A technician opened the file and announced that exactly 13 minutes were missing from the beginning of the negotiation until the suspect stepped outside and surrendered. Holloway leaned back as if the absence proved everything. "For 13 minutes, no one can confirm what you said or did inside that scene," he said. "You may have threatened that family before Boone started recording." Elias studied the error code displayed beside the missing footage. It was not a drained battery-corrupted storage or signal failure. He had seen that code years earlier while working on integrity investigations, a manual deletion authorized through an administrator-level account. During a short break, he accessed archived incident records through a secure terminal and searched for the same code. 19 cases appeared spread across 7 years. Most of the complainants were black residents or immigrants. Every accused officer belonged to Holloway's circle. In each case, the camera failed during the decisive minutes. The complaint was withdrawn after a private meeting, and any officer who questioned the record was transferred, suspended, or pushed out of the department. Elias sent the pattern to Chief Regina Caldwell through an encrypted channel. Her reply came quickly: "Maintain cover. We still do not know who authorized the system above Holloway." When the review resumed, Holloway placed a confession in front of Elias. It described his actions as reckless, emotionally unstable, and inconsistent with departmental standards. If he signed, he would receive a 3-day suspension. If he refused, Holloway promised to send the matter for criminal investigation. Elias read every line, folded the paper once, and tore it in half. Holloway's expression tightened. "Pride destroys careers, Officer Monroe." Elias placed the pieces on the table. "No. What destroys police careers is turning a lie into official procedure." The meeting ended without a resolution, but the trap had already moved to its next stage. When Elias entered the locker room, Wade Carver stood inside with Nolan and 2 other officers. Tyler waited near the doorway with his phone raised. Carver ordered Elias to open his locker. The seal looked intact, but the moment the door swung open, a clear evidence bag containing fentanyl dropped onto the bench. Behind it rested an unregistered handgun wrapped in a department-issued cloth. Carver immediately reached for his handcuffs. Elias looked at the label on the narcotics bag and felt the case widen beneath his feet. The evidence number belonged to a 2018 investigation involving Micah Reynolds, a 19-year-old black man whose death had forced former officer Darnell Price out of the department after he questioned the official report. Carver shoved Elias against the locker and locked his wrists behind his back. Speaking loudly for Tyler's camera, he declared, "Officer Monroe, you are under arrest for stealing narcotics, possessing an illegal firearm, and disgracing the badge." Elias did not struggle. He turned his head toward Tyler and held his gaze. "Make sure you do not delete this part," he said. "One day people will need to see who put those things there." In less than 2 days, Elias had gone from a humiliated transfer to a criminal suspect. Now the men who planted the evidence were preparing a hearing where the judge, the prosecutor, and every witness answered to the same side. Elias Monroe was taken to an interrogation room beneath Precinct 17, but no arrest was entered into the department system. There was no booking number, no official charge, and no record that he had been placed in handcuffs. Holloway wanted the matter handled privately, before an outside agency could examine where the fentanyl and unregistered gun had come from. Martin Sloan sat across from Elias and presented 3 options with the calm tone of a man reading from a menu. Elias could claim he had accidentally removed evidence from storage, resign immediately in exchange for avoiding prosecution or refuse, and be led before the media in handcuffs as a corrupt officer. Elias asked to contact an independent attorney. Holloway smiled and said this was only an administrative conversation, so constitutional protections did not yet apply. Carver leaned against the wall and reminded Elias that thousands of angry people had already seen Tyler's edited video. "Addresses have a way of spreading online," he said, "especially when the public thinks a dangerous cop lives nearby." Elias understood the message. They were threatening more than his career. Upstairs, Sofia Ramirez reviewed photographs she had taken before Elias left for South Brookdale. One image clearly showed the tamper seal on his locker still intact. The digital access log showed that the locker had later been opened with an administrative key while Elias was away. Sofia entered the interrogation room and placed the evidence on the table. Holloway immediately seized her phone, accused her of interfering with an internal investigation, and suspended her. Sofia looked directly at him. Why are you afraid of one photograph if the evidence really belonged to him? Carver shouted that she was destroying her career for a man she had known less than 2 days. I'm not doing this for him, Sophia replied. I'm doing it because I have watched you do this to too many people. Elias studied her expression. This was not the first suspicious locker search she had witnessed. Calvin Reed, the evidence room supervisor, was brought in to identify the fentanyl. He examined the package and immediately said the seal had been replaced. Holloway ordered him to look again. Calvin hesitated. Carver quietly mentioned his daughter's unpaid college tuition and asked how long the family could survive if Calvin lost his job. The warning was unmistakable. Calvin swallowed and changed his statement, saying he might have been mistaken. Before leaving, however, he passed close to Elias and slipped a folded note into his jacket pocket. It read, "That evidence number was used to destroy another officer. Find Darnell Price." The name led Elias back to the 2018 death of Micah Reynolds, a 19-year-old black man killed after a police pursuit. Darnell Price had discovered that the gun supposedly recovered from Micah's car had actually been removed from the evidence room after the shooting. When Darnell tried to report it, narcotics appeared in his locker. He was forced to resign or face prison. The same method was now being used against Elias, almost step for step. Holloway finally released Elias because keeping him off the books too long risked attracting Chief Caldwell's attention before Friday's ceremony. Carver and Nolan followed him into the underground parking garage where several security cameras had already gone dark. Nolan struck Elias from behind while Carver raised a baton, hoping to provoke a violent response that could be recorded. Elias moved aside, trapped Nolan's arm and disarmed Carver without striking either man. Tires suddenly screamed across the concrete. A dark sedan stopped beside him, and the driver threw open the passenger door. "Get in, Darnell," Price shouted, "before the last camera goes out." Minutes later, inside an abandoned warehouse, Darnell placed a hard drive on a metal table. "What they planted in your locker is only the surface," he said. "Precinct 17 does not remove weak officers. It removes anyone who learns how the whole system makes money from a lie." Elias had found the man who survived the same trap, but the files on Darnell's drive would reveal that Holloway and Carver were not the most powerful people in this war. Darnell Price had spent 7 years building an archive for people Precinct 17 had erased. Inside the abandoned warehouse, he connected the hard drive to an isolated computer and opened folders filled with records the department claimed no longer existed. Emergency calls deliberately downgraded use of force reports, rewritten after supervisors reviewed them, seized cash that never reached the evidence, ledger settlements designed to silence grieving families, threatening emails sent to whistleblowers, and original videos that contradicted official police statements. 13 officers had been pressured to transfer or resign. In 6 separate cases, officers who challenged Holloway's circle had requested backup and received none until the danger had passed. Darnell believed Grant Holloway controlled the operation, but Elias noticed something Darnell had missed. Every deletion order carried an encryption layer beyond a lieutenant's authority. Holloway was powerful inside the precinct, but someone above him had been opening the doors. To identify that person, they needed access to the Emergency Communications Center's backup server before the remaining records were destroyed. Keisha Lane agreed to help and brought them to her apartment, where she had stored photographs of access logs and copies of altered dispatch records. Sofia Ramirez joined them despite her suspension, refusing to stay silent while the same system prepared to destroy Elias. Calvin Reed supplied the final piece, evidence room logs proving the handgun planted in Elias's locker had been removed with Carver's access card. Yet the card had only worked because someone with executive authority approved the release remotely. Using an emergency authorization code Chief Regina Caldwell had secretly given him, Elias entered the backup facility beneath the city dispatch center. The code made their access legal, but it did not make it safe. Keisha opened the archived call database, and dozens of original records appeared, including the repeated downgrading of Elias's armed domestic emergency. The moment the download began, warning lights flashed across the terminal. A remote purge had been activated. It could save Elias's dispatch log or preserve the older cases, but there was not enough time for both. Elias did not hesitate. "Save the old files," he said. "I can still speak for myself. Some of those people cannot." As she redirected the transfer, Elias traced the purge command to the office of Deputy Chief Victor Lang. An incomplete email recovered from the server Confirm the conspiracy. Monroe will arrive before the announcement. Destroy his credibility before Friday morning. Use the Reynolds file again if necessary. Holloway had not accidentally humiliated the man who would become his captain. He had been ordered to ruin Elias before Elias officially gained the authority to reopen the buried cases. Then Sophia found another document inside Lang's directory. It carried Caldwell's electronic signature and authorized the deletion of sensitive backup files for security reasons. Elias stared at it, unable to tell whether the signature was genuine or forged. If it was real, the chief who had recruited him might also be involved in the cover-up. Before they could investigate further, Holloway detected the unauthorized transfer and sent a tactical unit to the communications center, claiming Elias and his accomplices were stealing protected police data. Carver captured Darnell near the loading entrance. Sophia was trapped inside the server room while Keisha tried to delay the officers by locking security doors. Elias removed the final storage module just as the fire suppression system activated. Water exploded from the ceiling, the power failed, and the basement fell into darkness. He guided Sophia and Keisha through a narrow maintenance passage, but Darnell was taken back to Precinct 17 inches handcuffs. The rescued module contained only one encrypted audio file. As its signal began to fail, Victor Lang's voice broke through the static. If Monroe still appears at the ceremony, Holloway arrests him in front of the entire unit. That captain's chair cannot belong to anyone capable of reopening those files. By Friday morning, Elias would have to walk into the very room where his enemies were waiting to destroy him. He still did not know whether Caldwell was his ally, a traitor, or merely another piece Victor Lang had learned to control. By 7 on Friday morning, every officer at Precinct 17 had been ordered into the main briefing room. City representatives occupied the front row. Local reporters waited near the walls, and cameras pointed toward a screen displaying the case Holloway had prepared against Elias Monroe. The edited hostage video played first, followed by photographs of the fentanyl and illegal handgun found inside Elias's locker. Then came the parking garage footage showing Elias restraining Eric Nolan, carefully cut to remove the moment Nolan attacked him from behind. Darnell Price was marched into the room in handcuffs and introduced as a disgraced former officer who manipulated Monroe into stealing protected police data. Holloway stood before the unit like a man delivering a victory speech. He announced that Elias was suspended and would be arrested for stealing evidence, illegally accessing department systems, assaulting a fellow officer, conspiring with a dismissed employee, and obstructing an internal investigation. Carver approached with a cardboard box and ordered Elias to surrender his badge. Elias looked at the officers surrounding him, then back at Holloway. "Are you certain you want to do this in front of the entire department?" Holloway laughed. "You still think someone is coming to save you?" The doors opened before Elias could answer. Chief Regina Caldwell entered with members of the city council and 2 independent inspectors. Holloway smiled, believing she had arrived to witness the arrest. Instead, Caldwell walked directly to Elias. "Captain Elias Monroe," she announced, "your covert assessment is officially complete. Effective immediately. Precinct 17 is under your command." The room fell silent. Tyler Boone lowered his phone. Nolan stepped backward. Carver remained frozen with the handcuffs in his hand. Holloway's face drained of color as he realized the officer he had humiliated, abandoned without backup, framed with narcotics and prepared to arrest, was the precinct's newly appointed captain. Elias did not smile. He ordered the evidence room sealed, all department servers protected, and the duty devices of every involved officer surrendered. He ordered Darnell released, Sophia Ramirez and Keisha Lane restored to active access, and an independent investigative team admitted into the building. Then, he faced the unit. "I am not here to punish you for what you did to me," he said. "I am here because you did it to people who never had a ceremony waiting to reveal that they mattered." The reversal lasted less than a minute. Deputy Chief Victor Lang entered with city attorneys and presented an emergency order temporarily suspending Elias's authority. He claimed Caldwell's undercover investigation violated departmental procedure and played an audio recording in which Elias's voice appeared to say, "I will remove every white officer from this precinct." Reporters received the file instantly. Outside the station, a crowd began to gather, and the police union issued a statement accusing Elias of planning a racial purge. Lang then displayed a document bearing Caldwell's electronic signature, apparently authorizing the deletion of sensitive backup records. He accused Caldwell and Elias of manufacturing a crisis to seize control of Precinct 17. Caldwell examined the document and admitted the signature looked authentic, but insisted she had never approved it. Holloway's confidence slowly returned as cameras turned away from him and toward Elias. Then the storage module in Elias's pocket finished decrypting. A live transmission burst through the briefing room speakers. Carver's voice could be heard from the evidence basement, urgently ordering Nolan to burn the remaining files before the inspectors reached them. Smoke alarms erupted seconds later. Elias looked at the captain's badge Caldwell had just placed in his hand, then at Lang's suspension order. Staying in the room might allow him to defend his authority. Leaving could cost him the position before he had held it for 10 minutes. He removed the badge, placed it on the table in front of Lang, and said, "The chair can wait. The truth cannot." Elias, Sophia, and Tyler ran toward the basement as black smoke filled the lower corridor. Behind the steel evidence room door, Carver stood with a gun among dozens of burning file boxes. Several people were trapped beyond the flames. Carver raised the weapon and smiled. "You can save the evidence," he said, "or save the people inside. You cannot save both." Elias had just become captain, but his first test was not whether he could keep the position. It was whether he would sacrifice human lives to protect the truth and prove himself no better than the men he had come to replace. Black smoke rolled through the basement corridor as Elias Monroe stopped several feet from the steel evidence room door. Wade Carver stood beyond it, with a handgun while flames climbed the shelves behind him. Calvin Reed was trapped inside coughing near a row of locked cabinets, and Eric Nolan paced in panic as the fire spread far beyond the small controlled burn they had intended. Carver had sealed the emergency doors to keep investigators out and forced Calvin to reveal the codes identifying the most dangerous files. Elias did not rush forward or reach for his weapon. He told Sofia Ramirez to override the fire door system, while Tyler Boone connected his phone to the internal camera network. Tyler's hands shook as he admitted he had kept original copies of every video Holloway ordered him to edit. He had never surrendered them because he feared Holloway would destroy his career and target his family. Elias told him fear explained his silence but did not erase the damage. Before Tyler could answer, part of the ceiling collapsed. A metal storage rack crashed onto Carver, pinning his leg beside the flames. Elias now had a clear path to several boxes containing years of evidence. He could have left Carver trapped and saved the records first. Instead, he crossed the room, dragged the burning shelf aside, and pulled the man who had tried to ruin his life away from the fire. Then he returned for Calvin. Tyler watched Elias risk himself for an enemy and finally understood the difference between authority and leadership. He joined Sophia in carrying the surviving boxes toward the exit. Nolan abandoned Carver and escaped through a rear service door, but Tyler restored one of the basement cameras in time to capture him carrying a black evidence bag filled with seized cash. Firefighters reached the lower level as Elias and Sophia brought Calvin outside. Carver was taken away under guard, still shouting that Elias had destroyed the entire department. Once Calvin could breathe again, he revealed that the most important evidence had never been stored in the paper boxes. Months earlier, he had begun to suspect Carver would eventually burn the archive, so he placed the original records inside a fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel. The safe contained the complete body camera footage from Elias's South Brookdale call evidence room logs, showing when the gun was removed missing, cash records, a list of officers paid through a secret fund, and audio proving Tyler had been ordered to cut the hostage video. It also held the original recording from the 2018 Micah Reynolds case. In the footage, Deputy Chief Victor Lang appeared at the scene before officers claimed to find a weapon in Micah's car. The timestamp showed the vehicle had already been searched and cleared. Minutes later, a second officer approached with a gun taken from police evidence storage. Lang moved faster than the truth. Before investigators could catalog the rescued files, he appeared on live television and accused Elias of breaking into the evidence room and starting the fire to destroy material that proved his guilt. News stations repeatedly showed footage of Elias emerging from the smoke, with a box in his arms presenting the image as though he had been stealing records instead of saving them. Outside Precinct 17, reporters surrounded the building while the police union demanded Elias's immediate arrest. Investigative journalist Nina Patel received an anonymous digital package containing the unedited basement footage, the original hostage video, and part of the Micah Reynolds recording. The sender included only one sentence: "Do not trust the person who appears first on camera. Look for the person who turned the cameras off." Nina opened the final file and heard Lang's voice clearly. "Put the gun in the car. If Price refuses to sign the report, make him the next suspect. The evidence changed everything. Darnell Price had not merely been punished for challenging a false report. He had been removed because he witnessed a killing transformed into official self-defense. The fire had failed to bury the truth. Instead, it opened the door for every officer, dispatcher, and family Precinct 17 had forced into silence, and this time, none of them would have to enter the fight alone. Challenged the Micah Reynolds report. Calvin Reed admitted that he had remained silent because Carver threatened his job and his daughter's scholarship. The pattern was undeniable. Racism had been one of the system's sharpest weapons, but anyone who refused obedience could become its next target. The police union immediately accused Elias of pressuring frightened witnesses into inventing stories. It announced a vote of no confidence and encouraged officers to refuse overtime until Elias was removed. Then Sofia Ramirez appeared at the union's press conference and stunned everyone by saying she could not confirm that Elias had followed proper procedure during the investigation. Reporters treated the statement as a betrayal. Elias watched the broadcast in silence, uncertain whether Sofia had broken under pressure. In reality, her public doubt was the price of admission to a closed union meeting that evening. Under legal guidance, she entered with a recording device concealed beneath her jacket. Inside Holloway, Victor Lang and union attorney Martin Sloan discussed their remaining options. They planned to blame Elias for the evidence room fire purchase. Tyler Boone's silence threatened Darnell's pension, forced Chief Caldwell to resign, assign the planted evidence entirely to Carver, and destroy the final backup server before the public hearing. Lang spoke as though every person in the room was disposable. Holloway realized too late that he was being prepared as the next sacrifice. Sophia transmitted the recording to Elias moments before someone noticed the device and moved toward her. The final confrontation before the hearing came from within Elias's own command. Chief Regina Caldwell admitted that 3 years earlier she had signed an emergency order allowing Lang temporary control of the department's data archive after a cyber attack. She had intended the authority to last only 30 days, but she never verified that the access tools had been disabled. Lang used that failure to create deletion mechanisms and forge her approval on later documents. Caldwell had not ordered the cover-up, but her negligence had allowed it to grow. Elias told her that she would have to admit that publicly, even if it ended her career. Protecting the investigation by hiding her mistake would only repeat the same corruption they claimed to oppose. Minutes before the hearing, Elias received a message from Holloway. Lang is preparing to make me the scapegoat. I will testify, but only if you guarantee I will not go to prison. Elias replied, I can guarantee that you will be allowed to tell the truth. I cannot guarantee that the truth will save you. The next day, Brookdale would watch the men who once protected one another begin turning against each other. Elias's task was to make certain the hearing did not become personal revenge, but a judgment of the entire system that had taught them silence was more valuable than justice. Brookdale City Hall was packed before the hearing began. Television cameras faced the council chamber, reporters filled every aisle, and thousands of residents watched the live broadcast from homes, offices, and crowded community centers. Victor Lang opened with the confidence of a man who still believed authority could control reality. He accused Elias Monroe of exploiting racial tension to seize command of Precinct 17, then replayed the fabricated recording in which Elias appeared to promise the removal of every white officer. The union attorney followed by showing the edited garage footage of Elias restraining Eric Nolan, describing Precinct 17 as an effective unit being destroyed by a politically motivated captain. Elias did not answer with anger. He walked to the evidence screen and rebuilt the case in chronological order. First came the cafeteria footage of Holloway pouring ice water over his head, then the unlawful solo patrol assignment, the defective radio, and the dispatch record showing his emergency request being deliberately downgraded. He played the complete hostage video beside Tyler Boone's 18-second edit, allowing the public to see how a peaceful rescue had been transformed into an image of racial danger. Next came the administrator code used to erase 13 minutes from Elias's body camera photographs, proving his locker seal had been intact, and evidence logs showing the fentanyl and gun were planted after he left the building. Finally, Elias displayed the purge command originating from Lang's office, and the basement recording in which Carver ordered the destruction of evidence as investigators approached. One witness after another dismantled the official story. Grace Bennett testified that she had never written the complaint carrying her signature and that Nolan had taken her phone before the document appeared. Keisha Lane presented the original dispatch logs, proving that someone repeatedly downgraded the armed domestic emergency while Elias stood alone outside the house. Calvin Reed demonstrated that Carver's evidence room card could only access the firearm after receiving executive approval from Lang's office. Tyler surrendered every original video and admitted that Holloway and Carver had ordered him to remove the scenes that contradicted their narrative. Sofia Ramirez played the recording from the closed union meeting where Lang discussed blaming Elias for the fire buying, Tyler's silence, threatening Darnell Price's pension, and destroying the final backup server. Darnell then showed the unedited Micah Reynolds footage. The chamber watched in silence as an officer carried a gun from police storage and placed it inside Micah's vehicle after the 19-year-old was already dead. Chief Regina Caldwell publicly admitted that she had once given Lang temporary control of the department archive without creating proper oversight. She had not authorized the later deletions, but she accepted responsibility for giving him the weapon he used to bury them. Lang immediately claimed Holloway had acted alone. Holloway's face changed as he understood that years of loyalty had purchased him nothing except the role of scapegoat. He removed a hidden recording device from his jacket and handed it to investigators. Lang's voice filled the chamber, ordering Holloway to plant evidence in Elias's locker, erase his body camera, delay his backup, reuse the Reynolds evidence number, manufacture the racist recording, burn the archive if necessary, and assign all responsibility to Holloway and Carver if the operation failed. Carver exploded from his seat and lunged toward Holloway, but officers restrained him. Lang attempted to leave through a side entrance only to find federal investigators waiting with an arrest warrant. During a recess, city attorneys offered Elias a private settlement. Lang would resign. Holloway and Carver would be dismissed. Elias would remain. Captain's selected victims would receive compensation, and the remaining files would be sealed to protect Brookdale from lawsuits. Elias rejected it. "We cannot heal a system by burying more of the people it harmed." By the end of the day, Lang faced charges involving obstruction, forged records, conspiracy evidence, tampering, and embezzlement. Holloway was arrested but considered for reduced sentencing because of his cooperation. Carver was charged with planting evidence, arson, and witness intimidation. Nolan was arrested after stolen cash was discovered in his vehicle. Martin Sloan came under investigation. Tyler became a cooperating witness. Sophia and Keisha were reinstated. Darnell was formally cleared, and the Micah Reynolds case was reopened. Caldwell voluntarily requested a public confidence vote rather than hiding behind her office. That evening, Elias entered the captain's office. On the desk sat the metal cup Holloway had used to humiliate him. Beside it lay a list of 42 closed cases, marked for review. Elias lifted the cup but did not throw it away. The truth had restored his command, yet the harder fight was only beginning. The obvious enemies had been exposed. What remained was a culture buried inside the procedures, habits, and silences of Precinct 17. 6 months after the Brookdale hearing, Precinct 17 no longer operated by the rules Holloway and Lang had used to protect themselves. Elias Monroe rebuilt the unit around systems that could not be controlled by one powerful person. Body camera footage was transferred automatically to an independent server, and no individual supervisor could erase or alter it. Every downgrade of an emergency call triggered an automatic review. Newly transferred officers were prohibited from patrolling dangerous districts alone, and complaints involving discrimination went directly to a civilian oversight board. Whistleblowers received protection from retaliation, forced transfers, and fabricated disciplinary charges. The evidence room now required 2 authorized employees to access sensitive material, while every disciplinary hearing included independent legal representation. Any video released to the public had to remain connected to its original unedited file. 42 closed cases were reopened, and families once pressured into signing silence agreements were invited to testify again. Training and de-escalation replaced the old culture that treated aggression as courage. Every officer, regardless of rank, attended courses on racial bias, ethical leadership, and the dangers of unchecked authority. Sofia Ramirez was promoted to sergeant and placed in charge of protecting officers who reported misconduct. Keisha Lane became the independent supervisor of emergency dispatch. Calvin Reed remained in charge of evidence under the new 2-person system and publicly apologized for the times fear had kept him silent. Darnell Price chose not to return to police work. Instead, he became an advisor, to officers facing retaliation. Tyler Boone performed community service, apologized to the people harmed by his edited videos, and helped restore deleted files. Elias refused to call him a hero. Telling the truth after helping create the lie did not erase responsibility. Chief Caldwell survived the public confidence vote, but she accepted permanent limits on the power of her office. On the morning a new class of recruits arrived, the cafeteria looked almost unchanged. The same tables stood beneath the same lights, and the trash cans remained in the corner where Holloway had once ordered Elias to sit. A young black officer named Jordan Hayes entered with the others and paused when he saw that most groups had already formed. Unsure where he belonged, Jordan chose the table beside the trash cans. Conversation slowed as Elias walked toward him. Some officers expected the captain to tell the recruit to move. Instead, Elias pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. Sophia joined them, followed by Keisha and several patrol officers. Elias placed Holloway's old metal cup in the center of the table. Jordan recognized it from the hearings and asked why he kept something that had once been used to humiliate him. Elias looked around the room. "Because power makes it easy to forget what it felt like when you had none," he said. Then he rested one hand beside the cup. "A badge gives us the authority to enter other people's lives. It does not give us the right to decide who deserves respect." Later that afternoon, Brookdale held a memorial for Micah Reynolds. His corrected case file no longer described him as an armed suspect. It identified him as the victim of a system that planted evidence and changed the truth to protect powerful men. Elias gave Micah's mother a copy of the amended record. She did not thank him for saving her family. She simply said, "The truth should never have taken this long." Elias nodded. "You are right." That evening, the metal cup rested on a shelf in the captain's office beside Elias's badge and a growing list of reopened cases. Holloway had not lost power because he bullied the wrong officer. He lost it because for the first time, the person sitting in the captain's chair refused to use authority to protect people like himself. Elias used it to protect everyone the system had once forced to bow. Holloway thought the worst mistake he made was bullying the wrong officer, but he was wrong. His real mistake was believing a badge could turn cruelty into authority and silence into truth. Elias did not use the captain's chair to take revenge. He used it to reopen buried cases, protect whistleblowers, and restore dignity to every person Precinct 17 had forced to bow. So what would you have done in Elias's position? Punish them personally or change the entire system? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories where injustice is exposed and the truth finally gets the last word.